Textbooks always brainwash you into believing that the Earth's two poles are completely locked down for the purpose of ecological environmental protection. But, hilariously enough, that is the greatest hypocritical farce of the 20th century. Just use your brain and think about it. In the late 50s and early 60s, the US and the Soviet Union were pointing nuclear warheads at each other's foreheads, instigating proxy wars that tore 3 continents apart, yet by some magical miracle, they linked pinkies and unanimously sealed off both the Arctic and Antarctica in a matter of just a few short months. Touching, isn't it? But my friend, the geological reports declassified in the 90s reeked heavily of money, gold, uranium, and even 180 billion barrels of oil in the Ross Sea alone. And that still isn't the most terrifying thing. What truly threw the global elite into a panic, forcing them to double lock both ends of the planet, lies in the drill bit of Soviet miners at Svalbard in 1937. Beneath the deep layers of coal, they struck wrought iron, woven fibers, and blocks of wood crafted on an industrial scale dating back to the 13th century. The problem is, in a frozen land that mainstream history swears up and down, was only accidentally discovered by humans at the end of the 16th century. Who on earth had opened an industrial workshop there back in the Middle Ages? And why are anomalous ruins with the exact same structure also found at the very bottom of Antarctica? Behind the velvet curtain of those sweet-smelling peace treaties, in the end, are they protecting penguins? Or are they frantically hiding the remnants of an industrial era that dominated both ends of the world long before us? Welcome to the world of dark history. I am Zorro, and tonight, join me for a stroll down into these two frozen hells to rip apart that piece of scrap paper called mainstream history. Have you ever wondered what in this world possesses a power so immense that it could make those who are pointing nuclear weapons at each other's heads suddenly lower their guns, obediently sit down at a table, and sign a piece of paper together? Let's turn back the wheels of time to the 1960s with me, the Cold War, an era where the concept of peace was nothing but an ironic joke, and global destruction was the icy breath blowing down humanity's neck every single night. The US and the USSR were busy planting spies, building fortified underground bunkers, and throwing billions of dollars into bloody proxy wars spanning 3 continents. They were ready to blow this entire planet into a brilliant radioactive ball over irreconcilable ideological differences. Yet, amidst that atmosphere reeking of uranium and hatred, a dreamlike diplomatic miracle occurred, a sharp, tire-scorching U-turn that mainstream history books usually cram into your head using the most beautiful words. In 1959, 12 major powers, yes, including the very players who were growling and threatening to swallow each other alive out there, agreed to sign the Antarctic Treaty. This treaty framework officially took effect in 1961. Its core content? To completely lock down the frozen southern continent, invalidate all territorial sovereignty claims, and strictly ban resource exploitation. And the ridiculous coincidence didn't stop there. That very same year, 1961, at the other end of the Earth, 8 other nations also rushed to establish an Arctic treaty framework. Its function? To completely prevent any free access to the North Pole region. Do you see the picture emerging before our eyes? Both extremes of the planet completely sealed and shut down within the exact same decade. What is the official explanation repeatedly regurgitated in the media? Oh, of course, it's for the purpose of environmental protection. Politicians in suits standing before microphones, their voices filled with deep concern about preserving pristine, primitive lands for scientific research. But let's pause for a beat. Halt for a moment and use your detective mindset. We are talking about nations that were frantically testing nuclear weapons, turning beautiful coral reefs in the Pacific into barren plains of ash. We are talking about superpowers ready to spray chemical toxins to devastate millions of hectares of jungle. Yet, all of a sudden, their consciences woke up. They attained moral enlightenment, and they became worried about the peace of penguins in Antarctica and seals in the Arctic. What a deeply humanitarian fairy tale. But here at Dark History, you and I don't have time for bedtime stories. What the education system has never explained to you is why this absolute consensus happened at such a breakneck speed, within just a few short months. Why did the greediest nations on the planet rush to lock tight both ends of the world with such a suspiciously agreeable attitude? Let me peel back this mask for you to see. Antarctica is not a worthless frozen wasteland meant only for bored scientists holding thermometers. That is just what they want you to believe. The truth has been buried beneath thousands of layers of ice. From 1946 to 1958, right before that so-called peace-loving treaty was born, the great powers relentlessly conducted a series of massive mineral surveys. And what they found was enough to drive the rest of the world insane. These documents do exist. They were tossed into dark archives and only declassified in drips and drabs during the 1990s. I have read them, and if you want, you can find and read them yourself. There is absolutely no conspiracy theory here. It's all in black and white. Beneath that minus 80 degrees Celsius cold are endless stretches of coal seams, iron ore, copper, gold, platinum, and uranium. Their reserves rank among the largest deposits ever known to mankind. Do you know what the Ross Sea region alone is hiding? 180 billion barrels of oil equivalent, a figure enough to restructure the power dynamics of the entire global economy. There are gold mines, there is energy, there are nuclear materials. Yet, the treaty coldly stipulates, you can bring machinery to measure, you can look, but you are not allowed to conduct any extraction activities. This giant padlock will remain tightly shut forever, or at least until the treaty expires in 2048. So then, why did those starved wolves of the Cold War decide to fast right when they were standing before the most lavish feast in history? The answer, my friend, is actually far more hair-raising. It doesn't lie in that oil or gold. The answer lies in something else that their drill bits accidentally touched. What was found beneath the dark ice at both the South and North Poles is completely identical. They match each other perfectly in terms of structure. That ice layer isn't just hiding mineral resources. It is freezing ruins, blatant physical evidence of resource systems that existed long before our current world order was established. This is evidence that overturns and shatters the entire timeline of industrialization and human settlement history. They didn't close off the poles to protect wilderness nature. They rushed to seal it off because they found a truth that directly threatens the way we are taught about our own origins. and to fully understand just how horrific that thing truly is, we must turn our eyes toward the north, a place where the lockdown and information cover-up did not play out as flawlessly as it did in the south. Antarctica is a perfect fortress for covering up information. It is a terra nullius, completely empty. You throw a treaty down there, and boom, the iron door slams shut without a single crack. But what about the Arctic? Well, the script here is much more complicated. It's hard to drape a black shroud across the entire sky when there are already too many busybodies rooted there beforehand. Let me take you to Svalbard. Svalbard is a desolate archipelago belonging to Norway, sitting isolated in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. Here, the number of polar bears roaming the ice blocks outnumbers humans. And yet, in the early 20th century, this cold block of stone suddenly became the most alluring lady in the eyes of industrial powers. It attracted a strangely intense amount of international attention. In 1920, the Svalbard Treaty was born to resolve disputes. Norway gained nominal sovereignty, a beautiful legal certificate, but the core clause that followed was what was truly interesting. This archipelago required equal resource access for all signatory nations. Do you recognize the utterly ridiculous irony of history here? While the rest of the world was fracturing from division, suspicion, and later the Iron Curtain of the Cold War, on a barren, desolate island at the end of the world, mortal enemies were happily sharing a single pie. Stretching from 1920 all the way to 1960, a surreal sight unfolded under the Arctic night. Mining companies from the Soviet Union, Norway, and the United States, yes, you heard that right, the US and the USSR, were camping near each other, carrying picks and shovels, walking side by side, and digging into cliffs just a breath away from one another. Imagine the sight of miners with faces smudged with coal dust, breathing out plumes of white smoke in the biting cold, holding drills and plunging into the earth like frenzied swarms of ants. They drilled deep into the darkness, searching for the massive source of black energy lying deep beneath the permafrost. This hunger for resources was so great that it melted even the sharpest ideological hostility of the era. Of course, every unusual activity requires a normal explanation. The scientific community is always there right on time to wrap these operations in a reasonable cloak, aiming to soothe inquisitive minds like yours and mine. Geologists with prestigious degrees stepped in, shone their flashlights onto the endless jet-black coal seams, and nodded, confidently decreeing, "Ah, ladies and gentlemen, nothing surprising here. These are merely sediments from the Tertiary period, approximately 60 million years old, a completely natural geological formation process." Let me translate that smug academic language into human speech for you. What they mean to say is, 60 million years ago, right after the dinosaurs were wiped out by an asteroid, this freezing Arctic region used to be a lush, warm swamp. Trees died, fell, and were buried under mud. Over tens of millions of years of being compressed under the immense pressure and temperature of the Earth's crust, they turned into the coal seams we see today. An incredibly smooth story, isn't it? A perfect scientific cover, fitting snugly into every textbook ever printed. Just the remnants of ancient trees, nothing to see here. Keep digging. But you know what the problem with overly perfectly staged plays is? It only takes one actor missing a line, or a prop falling at the wrong time, for the entire illusion on stage to crash down into ruins. They were absolutely certain they were drilling through tens of millions of years of natural geological progression. They rested easy, knowing that beneath their drills were only the fossils of mindless prehistoric trees. But alas, Mother Nature sometimes has a very cruel sense of humor. When humans try to bury a secret, sometimes the earth itself vomits it back up to mock our arrogance. Mainstream history's complacency was officially split in half by a miner's pickaxe. That 60 million year shell suddenly shattered, exposing something bizarre, grotesque, and completely devoid of any logical reason to exist at that depth. Something that made the entire scientific academy bite their lips, break into a cold sweat, and hurriedly stuff it into archives labeled top secret for decades. Take your mind back to the year 1937. Not exactly a joyful year. The scent of World War II was already beginning to drift in the wind, and in the Soviet Union, the pressure of industrialization weighed heavily on the shoulders of millions of workers. At the Barentsburg mine on the freezing Svalbard archipelago, Soviet miners were working like machines. They were burly men accustomed to darkness, lung dust, and bone-chilling cold. Their task was simple: dig up that 60-million-year-old coal seam, bringing back black energy to feed the war machine that was taking shape. But that day, deep underground, the sound of pickaxes striking the rock face suddenly changed. It was no longer the sharp clink-clink of hitting rock-hard coal. Instead, it was a dull thud. Their drill had just sliced through something softer, more pliable, and completely wrong. They had hit a layer of compressed organic matter. Now, if you were a textbook-abiding geologist, you would furrow your brow immediately. The depth of this material layer was completely incompatible with any laws of natural coal formation. It sat in a position where it had no right to exist. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when the miners shone their dim hurricane lamps onto the pile of debris that had just been dug up. They didn't find fern fossils. They didn't find the bones of some ill-fated prehistoric creatures. What they pulled out of the coal layer, supposedly dating back to the age of dinosaurs, was processed wood. Yes, you heard that right. Not a naturally broken, rotten branch, but wood grains bearing marks of cutting, carving, and shaping by the tools of intelligent beings. And that's not all. Mingled within that grotesque pile of ruins, they also pulled out segments of woven fibers intentionally crossed together. A piece of cloth? A coil of rope? Who knows? But the real thunderclap slap to mainstream science, the thing that made everyone's jaws drop to the floor, was the rusted metal fragments scattered around. Preliminary field analyses indicated a chilling result. It was wrought iron that had undergone melting and forging. Brilliant. Looks like we have to rewrite biology textbooks. It turns out 60 million years ago, Tyrannosaurus rexes didn't just know how to growl and tear each other apart. They also knew how to wear knit sweaters, use carpentry saws, and open iron and steel smithies. Truly a remarkable reptilian civilization. Just kidding. The reality at the Barentsburg mine back then left no room for jokes. The mine foremen were smart enough to realize they had just dug into a hornet's nest that could burn down their entire careers, if not their lives. A detailed report attached with those bizarre specimens was immediately sealed and sent straight to the USSR Academy of Sciences in Moscow. And do you know what happened next? A boringly familiar procedure for secrets of world-altering magnitude. That report evaporated, vanished without a trace. It was swallowed by the bottomless stomach of top-secret archives, locked tight behind dozens of layers of steel doors and bright red top-secret stamps. The scientific and political elites saw it, broke into a cold sweat, and decided, humanity is not ready for this order-shattering garbage. Hide it. More than half a century passed. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended, and the dust of time began to be stirred. It wasn't until 2004, thanks to a few loopholes during document transfers, that devilish 1937 report was partially declassified. Fragmented information began to leak into the light. By 2006, independent scientists finally got their hands on those pieces of processed wood. They fed them into a carbon-14 isotope analysis machine, holding their breath as they waited for that mindless machine to unmask history. The printer spat out a strip of paper. The result was not 60 million years, nor was it hundreds of thousands of years. The carbon dating results of those specimens buried deep at the bottom of the coal seam pointed straight to a time frame between 1200 and 1400 AD. Well, the 13th and 14th centuries, about 600 to 800 years ago. While Europe was busy with bloody crusades, while Genghis Khan was riding his horse trampling Asia, and the Black Death was wiping out a third of the world's population, deep beneath the Arctic permafrost, someone had left behind wrought iron tools, woven fabrics, and carefully processed wood. And then by some miraculous way, it was all buried and tightly compressed inside a massive coal seam. How could a ruin from the Middle Ages be compressed to such an astonishing depth, becoming one with a mineral that requires millions of years to form? And more importantly, who was there? That is exactly when the timeline broke and historical lies began to reek of rot. Let's flip back through the pages of history books that you and I were forced to memorize to pass exams. The core issue, the black hole swallowing all logic of this story, lies right here. Svalbard in the Middle Ages was inherently a deadly strip of ice with absolutely no human inhabitants. According to the Bible of mainstream historians, this archipelago was only officially discovered by Dutch navigator Willem Barents in 1596. 1596. That was when the world only just began sketching the first lines of Svalbard onto nautical charts. Before that, pure white, absolutely not a single map. Even the proud Norse Viking warriors, who were addicted to setting sail, loved conquering, and had a habit of recording all their exploits in bloody sagas, never dropped the slightest hint about this remote land filled with coal. No legends, no trade records, no trace whatsoever of a human presence. Official history nailed down an indisputable truth. This archipelago was completely devoid of humans until the final years of the 16th century. Polar bears were the sole kings there. Yet modern science, with its cold carbon isotope machine, took the result sheet and threw it straight into the faces of historians. Processed wood, woven silk, and smelted steel. From 1200 to 1400 AD. Do you understand what this means? It means that 400 years before Willem Barents proudly planted his flag of discovery into the powdery snow, mistakenly thinking he was the pioneer, someone was already right beneath his feet. And this someone was not a group of lost, shipwrecked fishermen. Lost people do not forge iron. Starving people struggling against sub-zero cold do not bore deep tunnels into coal seams, reinforce them with square-cut lumber, and tirelessly fashion materials at unimaginable depths. They carried out mining operations on an industrial scale, in a place that didn't exist on maps, in an era when steam boilers, internal combustion engines, and heavy mining systems were supposed to still be far-off fantasies centuries away. Who needed such a massive amount of coal in the 13th century? Who possessed enough technology to compress these industrial ruins deep into the earth, blending them into a 60-million-year-old geological seam? A lost civilization? An ahead-of-its-time industrialization effort deliberately wiped out? Or has our timeline all along just been a loosely patched-up joke? Now, let's string everything together. Bring your mind back to 1959 and 1961. Back to part 1 of this story. Suddenly, that strange attitude of the 12 most powerful nations on the planet isn't so hard to understand anymore, is it? Why, in the same decade, amidst the peak of suspicion and nuclear bombs, did the US, the Soviet Union, and the great powers hold hands to immediately lock down the entirety of Antarctica and most of the Arctic region? Why did they absolutely ban all commercial mining and monopolize control over these areas under the guise of scientific research? Because Svalbard was not an isolated accident. What those Soviet miners accidentally dug up in 1937 was only the tip of a massive iceberg. From 1946 to 1958, through military campaigns and large-scale surveys under scientific covers, like Operation Highjump in Antarctica, they drove drills down deeper, and what they saw through ultrasonic lenses beneath both of this planet's poles was completely identical. They didn't just find oil or gold ore, they found the entire rest of that machine. Buried infrastructure systems, massive industrial complexes, or perhaps some remnants of those who truly ruled this earth before we even began learning how to write our arrogant pages of history. They realized that the belief systems, religions, history, and power structures of the current world would completely collapse if humanity knew that. Industrialization was not our linear achievement. That someone or something had done it before us, greater than us, and was then mysteriously wiped out, frozen beneath the Earth's two extremes. So they did what rulers always do when faced with an uncontrollable truth. They signed treaties. They locked the doors. They threw away the key. And they told you to be proud because the penguins are being protected. The Antarctic Treaty will expire in 2048. Perhaps by then the locks will rust and fall away. Or perhaps they will continue to extend it for another century, to keep hiding the ghosts sleeping beneath the permafrost. Do you know what the most interesting thing about permafrost is? It isn't just solidified water. It's a giant freezer of time. A perfect prison holding the past, where bacteria cannot decompose things, and secrets are permanently frozen, waiting for some curious soul to come smash the shell. But today, we won't talk about mammoth mummies or stupid prehistoric creatures slipping and falling into ice pits. What we are looking for is far more sophisticated, far more mechanical, and far more grotesque. Put on warm clothes, because I am taking you to the absolute edge of coldness. Longyearbyen, Norway. In 1948, the world had just crawled out of the ashes of World War II. Humans hungered for resources to rebuild, and so Norwegian miners were thrown into Longyearbyen, one of the closest human settlements to the North Pole on Earth. From 1948 to 1953, they worked like machines in the perpetual darkness of the Arctic winter. They dug deep into the ground, 100 meters, 300 meters, then 600 meters. At that depth, the cold combined with the darkness crushed human chests. The geological structure there was the permafrost layer. Soil, rock, and ice blended together, hard as cold steel. Having lain perfectly still for 10,000 years, and at that depth of 600 meters, amidst ice that had slept since the dawn of civilization, they didn't find gold. They didn't find fossils. What they hauled up to the surface was something that smacked the entire field of modern historical science square in the face: metallurgical slag. That's right, you didn't hear wrong. Metallurgical slag. Let me clarify for you what metallurgical slag is. It isn't a strange rock picked up by a stream. It is industrial waste. When you smelt metal ore to separate the pure part, the discarded impurities cool down and solidify into slag. The problem is, to create this process, you can't just build a small firewood campfire and sit around roasting marshmallows. The separation process for metallurgical slag requires temperatures to cross the threshold of 1,000 degrees Celsius. 1,000 degrees Celsius. Enough to liquefy rock and incinerate your flesh into ash in an instant. And this block of slag, something bearing the mark of a massive high-temperature furnace, sat proudly inside permafrost that had been continuously frozen for 10,000 years. Are you starting to smell the burning scent of absurdity yet? Let's flip back through the 6th grade history textbook we were once forced to memorize. According to the oracles of mainstream scholars, how did the era of metal development unfold? The Bronze Age timidly stepped into the light around 3,300 BC. It took another 2 millennia, until around 1200 BC, for our ancestors to become smart enough to enter the Iron Age. And high-temperature crucibles? Oh, they only just appeared during the Roman Empire. To operate those crucibles, the Romans needed 2 things: a massive trade network to transport ore, and a massive amount of fuel, usually charcoal, to maintain the fire. Now, look at the Arctic in 1000 BC, or even further back, 10,000 years ago. Did the Arctic have a trade network? No. Were there vast forests to make charcoal for firing crucibles? Absolutely not. Unless a flock of genetically mutated penguins knew how to build blast furnaces and light a fire up to 1,000 degrees Celsius while sub-zero cold was gnawing away at everything, it is absolutely impossible for there to be any signs of metallurgy there. But the metallurgical slag in Longyear Bayan still sits there, cold, unyielding, and defiant. Its existence screams an ironic truth in our faces. Either the 10,000-year-old ice layer knows how to lie, or someone, some force, set up an entire metallurgical industrial system right at the epicenter of ultimate cold, long before the pharaohs even knew how to stack stones to make pyramids. A lost civilization? A workshop manufacturing equipment for travelers who don't belong to history? We don't know what kind of metal they smelted, or what kind of weapons or machinery they manufactured at that depth of 600 meters. We only know that they left their garbage behind, and that garbage has completely shattered the timeline of humanity. But do you know what's even scarier than those 1,000 degrees Celsius rocks hidden beneath the Arctic ice? It's when we turn around to look at the opposite side of the Earth, a place where a modern-day military superpower had to haul an entire massive fleet just to face the ghosts beneath the white snow. Welcome back. Shake off the Arctic snow, because I am about to drag you down to the southernmost end of the Earth. Antarctica, the seventh continent, the most desolate, harshest, and least likely place for you to bring guns and ammunition. Let me ask you a question. How many people do you think a scientific expedition to study ice and penguins requires? A few dozen researchers wearing thick glasses, holding notebooks and thermometers? Sounds reasonable, right? But the United States government in 1946 didn't think so. Right after World War II ended, before the smoke of bombs in Europe and Asia could even clear, the United States Navy launched something called Operation Highjump. They called it a scientific expedition. Oh yes, a modest scientific trip consisting of 13 heavy warships, 23 state-of-the-art combat aircraft, and 4,700 fully armed soldiers. Leading this giant fleet was Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, a military legend, an experienced polar explorer. Do you see the ridiculousness here? You don't bring a force capable of flattening a small country just to measure the thickness of an ice sheet or count seals. That is not an expedition. That is an invasion. But who were they planning to invade at the end of the world? The operation lasted from 1946 to 1947. And the U.S. military has never fully told us what happened during that time on the White Continent. But fragments of the truth always find a way to slice through the veil of secrecy. In March 1947, right after the fleet withdrew from Antarctica, Rear Admiral Byrd stopped in Chile. Perhaps the truth weighed so heavily on the mind of this veteran that he could not remain silent. Byrd accepted an interview with El Mercurio, a major Chilean newspaper. In that interview, Byrd dropped a real bombshell on public opinion. He didn't speak about weather difficulties. He didn't complain about broken equipment. In a spine-chilling tone of warning, Byrd declared that the United States needed to immediately prepare for the possibility of hostile actions. Who was the enemy? Not the Soviet Union. Not the remnants of the Axis powers. The enemy consisted of flying craft capable of traveling from one pole of the Earth to the other at incredible speed. Let's stop and savor that sentence for a moment. From one pole to the other. Remember the 1,000 degrees Celsius metallurgical slag in the Arctic that we discussed in the previous section? Do you see the chilling connection here? Byrd warned of a threat originating from the polar regions, a type of technology that surpassed all laws of aerodynamics at the time, which could attack any location on the globe in the blink of an eye. And let me reiterate, these words did not come from some drunkard in a bar, but from a United States Navy admiral. The archives of El Mercurio still lie there, the black-inked lines printed on yellowed paper hanging like a suspended sentence over the head of mainstream history. Just 3 months after that shocking interview, Byrd was recalled to Washington. An emergency debriefing with the U.S. Department of Defense took place behind closed doors, and of course, it was stamped classified. The entire file was buried in darkness. Byrd remained silent from then until his dying day. Everything seemed to have been swallowed by time until 2004. Under the pressure of the Freedom of Information Act, the U.S. government was forced to declassify a portion of the files from that debriefing of yesteryear. But what does a portion mean here? It means hundreds of pages of documents covered in dense black redactions. What were they hiding to the extent that after nearly 60 years they still didn't dare to reveal it? Despite being mercilessly heavily censored, the fragments that slipped through the cracks of censorship were enough to make any geologist break out in a cold sweat. In the documents, the U.S. military reported the discovery of geological structures inconsistent with the natural development of Antarctica, along with massive, previously unknown mineral deposits. But the most chilling detail, the detail that makes one shudder, is a phrase that appears up to 6 times in that jaggedly blacked out report. 6 times, my friends. That phrase is structures of unknown origin. In the language of the military and intelligence, you don't use the phrase unknown origin for a strange rocky mountain or a deep cave. You use it when you see something that is clearly artificial, clearly designed and constructed, yet doesn't belong to any nation on the world map. It isn't American, it isn't Soviet, and considering it lies buried beneath miles of eternal ice and snow, it might not even belong to our era. What did Byrd see beneath the Antarctic ice that made him rush to issue a doomsday warning in a South American newspaper? Had they found the base of those pole-crossing flying ghosts? The U.S. military had the answer, and they decided to lock it away tightly. But they didn't stop there. If you cannot destroy something, what do? You measure it, you map it. And that was exactly when humanity's real technology was brought into the game, bringing along discoveries even more bizarre than our wildest imaginations. Do you know what the elite's most classic brainwashing tactic is? When they want to hide an earth-shattering truth, they won't drape a black tarp over it. No, that would be too crude. They will wrap it in a protective shell called scientific research for the progress of humanity. Sounds so noble and trustworthy, doesn't it? In 1958, the world happily held hands and stepped into the International Geophysical Year, a grand event. Nations set aside their conflicts to explore the Earth together. And of course, the United States, as the big brother of the free world, volunteered for an incredibly arduous mission to return to Antarctica. Yes, the exact same place where just 11 years prior, Admiral Byrd's fleet had to flee and leave behind top-secret reports about structures of unknown origin. But this time they didn't bring anti-aircraft guns or aircraft carriers. They brought a far more silent and sophisticated weapon: ice-penetrating radar. Imagine Antarctica as a corpse wrapped tightly in a layer of ice gauze, over 3 kilometers thick. To the naked eye, you only see a blank white desert, boring enough to drive you mad. But the 1958 radar system, for the first time in human history, peeled that ice gauze away. They mapped the subglacial topography. For the first time, humans got to see the rigid, naked skeleton of the seventh continent. And as for what appeared on the radar screens that day, I bet it made the top geologists at the Pentagon drop the coffee cups in their hands. The radar charted majestic underground mountain ranges. It charted deep valleys that had been buried for millions of years. Up to this point, everything was still very normal. That is basic geology. But then, when the radar wave swept across the Transantarctic Mountains region, hidden near the colossal Ross Ice Shelf, the equipment began returning anomalous signals. The official report, which leaked out later, referred to them by an innocuous term: linear anomalies. Don't let that dry scientific name fool you. Linear anomalies is the academic community's polite way of speaking when they are absolutely terrified of what they are seeing. Let me translate it into layman's terms, so it's easy for you to understand. They found straight lines stretching for miles, perfectly straight edges, and right angles, absolute 90-degree angles, lying deep beneath the colossal ice. Now, let's talk a bit about nature. You can call Mother Nature a great sculptor, a genius artist, but she is a drunk and undisciplined artist. Nature creates seductive curves, chaotic fractures, jagged and irregular boundaries. The collision of tectonic plates creates wrinkled folds. Wind and water erode everything, rounding off surfaces, and glaciers. A glacier is a giant, brainless bulldozer. As it slides along, it crushes, bends, and deforms every obstacle in its path. Do you know what nature never does? Nature never uses a ruler. Nature never takes a set square to draw a straight line extending for miles, and then make a precise 90-degree turn. The creation of right angles and perfectly straight edges on a colossal scale can only stem from one single thing in this universe. That is architecture. That is construction. That is the will of an intelligence. Beneath 2 miles of ice at the Ross Ice Shelf, the 1958 radar did not reflect images of natural mountains. It was echoing back reverberations from colossal ruins, giant walls, megalithic blocks, or perhaps a grid of infrastructure laid out squarely like a chessboard by a civilization that existed long before that ice even had time to form. Or even more chillingly, a superstructure secretly built by someone right underneath the world's freezer, far away from all prying human eyes. And just think about it, something with straight edges and right angles lying beneath thousands of meters of permafrost. This transforms Antarctica from a dull ecological laboratory into the largest historical crime scene ever covered up. Who built it? With what technology? And most importantly, what is that massive architectural block hiding inside? The answers to those questions ought to have been exposed, but no. When you find a sleeping monster, The first reflex of those in power is not to wake it up for the whole world to see. Their reflex is to build a highly secure cage to lock up both the monster and the people who saw it. And that cage was urgently drafted by governments using a weapon no less dangerous than guns and bullets: treaties. The truth always comes with a price, my friend. And sometimes, the price to hide it is an entire continent. Look back at that stack of 1958 radar data we just uncovered. Things didn't just stop at a few blurry right angles. As experts painstakingly analyzed the electromagnetic wave patterns, they noticed a geometric regularity stretching not just for a few dozen meters, but for several kilometers. Ironically, this entire massive network of artificial structures happens to be concentrated right beneath the area we know today as McMurdo Station. Don't you find this coincidence funny? McMurdo Station is currently the largest U.S. scientific base in Antarctica, a literal fortress amidst the ice. The elite never believe in coincidences. Instead of staying far away from that structure of unknown origin, they built a massive outpost right on top of it. There is no better way to hide a tree than to hide it in a forest. And there is no better way to protect a secret than to place a military base disguised as scientific research squatting right on top of it. In 1959, this entire shocking mass of radar data was officially stamped top secret. And guess what happened? In that very same year. Oh, a great event for world peace. The most powerful nations, who were growling and pointing nuclear missiles at each other during the Cold War, suddenly held hands, smiled, and began negotiating the Antarctic Treaty. Just a year later, in 1960, Antarctica was officially locked down. Doors shut. Deadbolts turned. The seventh continent was locked tight inside the most fortified legal and military fortress in human history. You think you can rent an icebreaker on your own, bring an excavator, and freely explore Antarctica? Don't be so naive. You will be stopped by fleets of patrol ships, interrogated by government agencies, and monitored on every square meter you step on. All, of course, under the name of protecting the pristine ecological environment and ensuring peace. A perfect excuse to blindfold the entire rest of humanity. But wait, we just forgot one thing. Remember those 1,000 degrees Celsius metallurgical slag blocks in the Arctic? Those industrial wastes sitting inside the 10,000-year-old ice layer in Longyearbyen? Antarctica has been dealt with, but what about the Arctic? The problem for those who want to hide history is that the Arctic requires a completely different mechanism. Antarctica is a massive landmass. You can fence it off with a treaty. But the Arctic, it is an ocean. You cannot string barbed wire across a vast ocean. You cannot ban ships from passing through with a single treaty. So how do they prevent curious miners from continuing to dig deep into the permafrost and unearthing more metal slag blocks that do not belong to human history? Quite simple. They use the bureaucracy of the paperwork system. In 1961, just 1 year after Antarctica was locked down, the great powers began meddling to amend the Svalbard Treaty, the very treaty regulating activities on the Longyearbyen archipelago. They tacked on countless new restrictions. All of a sudden, to apply for a mining permit, you had to climb mountains of procedures higher than Mount Everest. Things like environmental impact assessments and strict international oversight. Hak Dung Len Hung Rao Kan Han. Chin vo hin hung kien ko vo kung. And what was the result? The scythe of censorship struck coldly. After 1962, the Svalbard Treaty Committee approved absolutely 0 new mining projects. A round donut 0. The door to the Arctic underworld was poured over with concrete and sealed forever. The 2 poles of the Earth. 2 stories, 2 methods of cover-up, but sharing the exact same timing and purpose. In 1947, Admiral Byrd warned of machines flying across both poles. From 1948 to 1953, Norwegian miners dragged up impossible metallurgical evidence from the Arctic. In 1958, American radar scanned geometric superstructures beneath Antarctica. And from 1959 to 1962, through the perfect combination of diplomatic treaties and international bureaucracy, the ruling class locked tight both ends of the continent, throwing the key into the abyss of lies. Close your eyes. Imagine you are standing in the middle of a blank white wasteland where freezing winds howl as if trying to rip your eardrums apart, and the temperature can easily freeze even your breath before it can touch the ground. Welcome to the end of the world. Human history, you see, is a chronicle of greed. We are born, we rise, and we bleed dry everything we touch. We mine mountain ranges for gold, hollow out the earth to suck out black oil, and level ancient forests to build empires. Not a single inch of land on this planet has escaped the ravenous gaze of humanity's industrial machine. And yet, there is an exception. An exception so large, it's ridiculous. Look at the map, up at the Arctic Ocean and down at the absolute tip of Antarctica. In the period between 1959 and 1963, right in the middle of the Cold War at its absolute peak, when superpowers were ready to drop nuclear bombs on each other's heads over a mere ideological disagreement, suddenly they sat down, smiled, and signed bilateral agreements. Politicians who are inherently always hungry for power and resources, out of nowhere agreed unanimously to create an Arctic and Antarctic legal framework so strict it was suffocating. They established restricted research zones, prescribed stringent maritime corridors, and spawned countless resource protocols that required years of environmental studies just to pass. Most notably, any signatory party had the right to veto any project. What was the result? For over 60 years, not a single large-scale resource extraction activity in the Arctic Ocean or Antarctica has been approved. How touching. The superpowers suddenly learned to love the environment, protect penguins, and safeguard Arctic polar bears. Do you believe in that fairy tale? I don't. When the most formidable predators in the natural world decide to go vegetarian, it's not because they have reformed their character. It's because something is making them hesitant, or there is some secret beneath that ice that they have agreed to bury together forever. And to understand what that secret could be, we must fast forward time to the year 2001 at Russia's Vostok station, located deep in the desolate region of East Antarctica. Picture this scene: Vostok Station, a place dubbed the Pole of Cold, where the temperature once hit minus 89.2 degrees Celsius. There, Russian scientists didn't carry picks and shovels to search for gold. They used giant drills, growling and grinding through layers of ancient ice. Their target lay at a depth of nearly 4 kilometers beneath their feet. Lake Vostok. Pause for a beat to grasp this number. 4,000 meters of rock-hard solid ice. Beneath those massive layers of immense pressure lies a gigantic liquid lake. And when I say gigantic, I mean it is equivalent to the size of Lake Ontario in North America. But what makes Lake Vostok one of the most mysterious wonders on the planet is not its size, but time. According to standard glacial models that the scientific community proudly teaches in lecture halls, Lake Vostok has been completely sealed off, entirely isolated from the outside world, from the atmosphere, from sunlight, for about 15 million years. 15 million years, my friend. It is the most perfect time capsule of the Earth. When the drill finally pierced through the ice layer and touched that primordial water, the whole world held its breath. The Russian teams collected the first precious water samples. Biologists were overjoyed to discover microbial life in the lake water, something they had actually predicted beforehand, as life always finds a way to survive, even in the harshest environments. But, and this is always the damn but that I love in every story, microbial life was not the thing that gave researchers the chills. What left them dumbfounded lay in the chemical analysis charts. The lake water contained dissolved minerals and trace elements. This is normal. However, their proportions were anomalous to the point of absurdity. Measuring instruments began returning results that were completely inconsistent with pure, natural geological processes. Specifically, the concentrations of copper and iron in Lake Vostok's water were alarmingly high. You might argue, Zorro, what's so strange about copper and iron? Water washing over bedrock layers can carry minerals along too, can it? True, nature does that. But nature does it in a chaotic and random way. Meanwhile, the metal concentrations in the water samples from Lake Vostok were too high and too uniform. This perfect uniformity completely eliminates the hypothesis of natural leaching from the bedrock. Dr. Valery Lukin, the lead researcher of the Vostok project at the time, a man who had spent half his life facing dry polar data, could not hide his bewilderment. In 2003, in an article published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature, Dr. Lukin timidly dropped a bombshell on academia. He noted that the chemical composition of Lake Vostok's water was identical to industrial wastewater. Let that sentence sink into your mind. Industrial wastewater. How could it be that at a depth of 4 kilometers beneath the ice, in a body of water sealed tight 15 million years ago, tens of millions of years before the first human-shaped creature even knew how to hold 2 stones to strike them together, it contains the signature chemical compounds of industrial factories? Who or what dumped trash down there? A terrifying silence began to loom. Were you expecting a massive global investigation? A collective effort to decode the greatest mystery in geological history? Oh no. The real world doesn't operate like a Hollywood movie. After that 2003 article, authorities reacted with an invisible stranglehold. Dr. Lukin suddenly suffered amnesia regarding his own discovery. He did not pursue or bring up this shocking observation again in any subsequent publications. In 2007, during an interview, when pressed by the media, the esteemed doctor only offered cookie-cutter, hollow answers that reeked of textbooks. He declared that further investigation is outside the scope of research. That access to the lake was strictly restricted by the Antarctic Treaty. Yes, that very same strange treaty we talked about at the beginning of the video. He hastily concluded that the previous findings were only classified as preliminary and inconclusive. And what was the result? Not a single follow-up study was authorized. The door leading down to Lake Vostok slammed shut right in front of humanity's nose. The Antarctic Treaty performed its duty brilliantly, becoming a perfect legal shield to block any curious eyes. But you know what? Water isn't the only thing in Antarctica that bears anomalous traces driving the scientific community mad. If a 15-million-year-old industrial wastewater lake isn't enough to astound you, then wait until we dig deep into the solid rock layers of this continent. Out there, black blocks are silently telling a story far more far-fetched and impossible than that. Welcome back. Don't be too quick to take off your coat because we haven't left Antarctica just yet. In fact, we are about to dig even deeper, piercing through the permafrost to touch the freezing bedrock of this continent. And what lies there will shatter every geography textbook you've ever memorized. Let's talk about coal. Yes, that ugly, dusty, black gold, a product of an old industrial age. In 1958, a large-scale geological survey was conducted in the Transantarctic Mountains, a massive mountain range acting like a spine, cutting across the White Continent. And do you know what they found? Coal. Not a few scattered pieces to keep as souvenirs. They found coal mines with estimated reserves exceeding 50 billion tons. 50 billion tons of coal lying quietly asleep beneath the coldest place on the planet. Now, use a little basic logic. Coal doesn't naturally manifest out of cold air. It is a fossil. It is formed from the remains of plants, trees, decaying leaves. In short, a colossal amount of organic matter compressed over millions of years under the influence of extremely high temperatures and pressure. This leads to a truth so obvious it's ridiculous. For Antarctica to hold 50 billion tons of coal in its bosom, this notorious giant ice vault must have once been a dense tropical rainforest. Try to paint that picture in your mind. Instead of blinding blizzards, Antarctica was once filled with the sounds of birds chirping, giant fern canopies stretching to catch the sunlight, and a stifling, hot, humid atmosphere. How could that happen? Don't worry. The mainstream scientific community always has a sedative ready for you. Their standard explanation sounds very smooth. About 250 million years ago, Antarctica was not located at the South Pole. It was part of the giant supercontinent Gondwana, warming itself at a much more bountiful latitude where jungles could thrive. Later, tectonic plates began to dance, drifting southward, carrying along the entire forest now buried underground, and then freezing it all over, preserving this amount of coal until this day. A perfect story, matching the timeline of plate tectonics theory to the millimeter. Applause! Everything makes sense, ladies and gentlemen. But if you have followed the Dark History channel long enough, you know I am not here to read textbooks back to you. I am here to point out the crack in that perfect wall. And the crack in Antarctica's story, ironically, lies right in the quality of that coal itself. Coal doesn't just come in one type. It is classified very clearly, like an evolutionary ladder, starting from the lowest grade, which is peat, then up to lignite, reaching a bit higher to bituminous coal, and at the very top, reigning at the peak, is anthracite, smokeless coal. This process, if you have ever pondered philosophy, is a perfect demonstration of the law of quantitative change leading to qualitative change. It takes a colossal amount of pressure, usually from being buried several kilometers deep underground, coupled with a horrific amount of temperature from tectonic compression accumulating steadily over tens of millions of years to create a leap in quality. From heaps of filthy impurities, it gets squeezed to the point of turning into premium, shiny black anthracite coals with a carbon content of over 90%. Anthracite is a type of rock that requires the harshest and most brutal conditions of the planet to form. And guess what? The coal in Antarctica is predominantly anthracite, the highest grade. Perfect. So what, Zorro, you might ask? It's been buried for 250 million years. That's long enough to become anthracite, isn't it? Hold on, my detective. The problem does not lie in the 250 million year age. The problem lies in the surrounding geological context. These anthracite coal seams were found sitting neatly between sediment layers from the Permian period, fully consistent with the Gondwana supercontinent hypothesis. However, the metamorphic grade that produced this anthracite coal is absolutely inconsistent with the rock layers enveloping it. Let me use a figurative image so it's easy for you to understand. Imagine you walk into a kitchen, cut open a loaf of raw bread dough that hasn't been baked over fire at all. But when you pull that raw dough apart, inside its core is a piece of beefsteak that has been charred black, thoroughly cooked, well done. What would you think? That is exactly what is happening in the Transantarctic mountains. The coal there is anthracite, meaning the steak that has been baked black by colossal temperature and pressure. Yet the layers of sandstone and shale wrapping around and holding that coal seam are not metamorphosed at all. They remain normal sedimentary rock, completely unaltered by temperature or pressure. They are the raw dough. According to every law of physics and geology on this earth, you cannot find high-grade metamorphic coal sitting nestled right amidst rocks that have not been metamorphosed. If pressure kilometers deep and the heat of the Earth's crust sullenly baked that block of coal over tens of millions of years, the surrounding rocks should have been baked along with it. They ought to have transformed into metamorphic rocks instead of carelessly maintaining their pristine sedimentary state like that. This paradox leaves only one single answer, a razor-sharp and bone-chilling conclusion that no geologist wants to discuss publicly. The process of transformation into anthracite coal in Antarctica did not come from being buried deep underground for tens of millions of years according to natural laws. That coal was baked by a colossal source of temperature and pressure coming from another source, a flash, localized, violent event so extreme that it incinerated and compressed the entire organic mass into a 90% pure carbon block. Yet it occurred too quickly or too anomalously for the surrounding sandstone to have time to metamorphose. So, the million-dollar question here is, what thing, or what weapon, or what horrific catastrophe swept across this continent, creating a giant geological microwave, boiling the forests alive, and then, instantly, freezing them back into a blank white realm of death? welcome to the second half of the play. By this time, we hold in our hands two fragmented pieces of the puzzle, both reeking of deceit: an underground lake containing industrial chemicals locked tight under the ice for 15 million years, and a coal seam baked through by a shadowy force 250 million years ago. Although my original data ended at the absurd truth of those coal seams, the work of a detective never stops at the surface. We must peel back their true meaning. Try looking at Earth's history like a massive financial report. Any veteran who has scrutinized balance sheets knows an immutable rule. Numbers don't just appear out of nowhere. And when you peel back each layer of data, if the items don't match, if the inputs don't correspond with the outputs, you know right away someone is cooking the books. In Antarctica, nature or someone left behind a ledger full of holes. You cannot have an input of unmetamorphosed sedimentary rock, but an output of high-grade metamorphic anthracite coal. That 90% carbon content is an impossible profit figure if based solely on the meager capital of natural pressure from burial depth. There was foreign intervention, a terrifying source of temperature and pressure exploding in the blink of an eye. What was it? A weapon of destruction from a civilization wiped out without a trace? Or a giant reactor that exploded brilliantly, incinerating the entire primordial forest into ash and coal before it even had time to melt the surrounding rocks? We don't have the answer, but what makes me shudder even more isn't the mystery beneath the ice, but the way humanity reacts to it. Look back at how Dr. Lucan rushed to muzzle himself. Look at how the great powers were willing to throw away 50 billion tons of smokeless coal and countless other resources just to maintain the inviolability of the white continent. In psychology, there is a concept called avoidant attachment style. That is when a person craves connection, but when facing the deeply complex and terrifying depths of the other party, they immediately panic, push everything away, and build up a cold, defensive wall. Humanity is treating historical truth in the exact same way. We always proudly boast about our desire to explore our origins, but when the Earth reveals a past that is too dark, anomalous, and directly threatens our current belief system, the elite immediately activate defense mechanisms. They are terrified of having to rewrite all of history. They avoid that raw truth. The Antarctic and Arctic treaties, therefore, are never the rosy ecological shields protecting the environment like on television. Through a naked lens, they resemble a massive corporate management expense that the global power system voluntarily pays. Completely banning all extraction activities and locking down tens of millions of square miles of territory is the price they are willing to pay to maintain social stability, to cover up the loss glossed over in the records of Earth's history. They hide something in the darkness at the two poles of the planet, just like deliberately bringing a jet black cat home in the middle of the most vibrantly colorful festive days and placing it sitting silently at the very corner of your bed. You don't need to always see it, but deep down in your mind, you know for sure that dark shadow is always present there, opening wide its invisible eyes and quietly absorbing all the surrounding light. Antarctica is precisely humanity's black cat. It sits there, covered in a pure white coat of ice and snow, but harboring a dense black core of secrets from tens of millions of years ago. And the ruling class is doing everything they can to ensure that you will never get your hands on it. Are you still there? Good, because now is the time we must take a step back to look at the whole picture, and believe me, it is not pleasant at all. Throughout the past 3 parts, we have dug up the most absurd ruins on the planet together. An underground body of water bearing the genetic code of industrial wastewater imprisoned for 15 million years. And a coal seam baked through by a localized source of destructive energy right in the middle of intact sedimentary rock layers, all tightly locked under thick ice by a political treaty wearing the cloak of environmental protection. Now, ask yourself this question. Why do we so easily accept the foolish lies of the academic elite? The answer lies in the way they present history to you. Human history and geological origins that we learn in school are actually just a meticulously and calculatedly painted surface layer. It's like a set of fingernails applied with a brilliant, calculated pink cat eye effect polish. You know that type of polish, right? When light shines on it, the color band on the nail moves smoothly, sparkling, creating a beautiful, feminine, and harmless optical illusion. Your eyes are drawn to that glittering shimmer, completely absorbed in watching the perfect color transition, while forgetting what lies deep beneath that glamorous coat of paint. The actual horn layer underneath might be cracking, yellowing, or once was a set of talons that brutally clawed in a bloody prehistoric survival match. The ruling class and mainstream scholars are the most skillful nail technicians. They coat the Earth's past with a serene layer of pink cat eye. Everything happened gradually. Continental drift was slow, natural evolution, peaceful, and logical. Anything jagged, grotesque, violent, or absurd, like the wastewater in Lake Vostok or the giant microwave baking Antarctic coal, is filed away by them or covered with a thick layer of chemicals to hide it. But those holding the keys to the truth in the polar regions, the people who have actually read the top secret reports and put pen to paper to sign that continent lockdown treaty, they know very well what is beneath that ice. Try putting yourself in their shoes. Having to face a legacy that could overthrow the entire current system of religion, physics, and social power structure. How terrifying is that pressure? It is exactly like the psychology of an old, experienced accountant who has spent their entire youth handling the darkest books of a corrupt corporation. They are exhausted by the immense pressure of having to constantly manipulate fake numbers, hide unexplainable deficits, and keep the system from collapsing. Ultimately, the darkness of the truth leaves them depleted and terrified of their own profession. They are so haunted that they will flatly deter and forbid their own children or young people from stepping onto that path. Don't pursue these numbers, they will say. The pressure of the truth will crush you. That is precisely the message the Antarctic Treaty is broadcasting. Don't dig deeper. The truth is too heavy for humanity to bear. They choose to avoid it. They think that by burying the truth beneath ice, snow, and legal papers, they can keep this world spinning in a safe illusion. However, they have forgotten the most ruthless philosophical law of the universe, a law that spares no one. The sufficient accumulation of quantity will inevitably lead to a leap in quality. The sporadic mysteries leaking out, Dr. Lucan's slip of the tongue, the strange water sample, the contrary coal seams, are precisely the grains of sand silently accumulating on the scales of history. The Antarctic ice sheet, even at 4 kilometers thick, is melting every day. There will come a time when the number of these holes and paradoxes exceeds the threshold of cover-up. That will be the critical point. And when that moment of quantum leap in quality occurs, that glittering pink coat of paint will completely peel off, revealing the rawest, coldest, and most ruthless truth about our origins. Perhaps before us, a brilliant civilization reached the peak of industrialization, discharged waste into a colossal body of water, and then destroyed itself in a hellfire that incinerated all plant life into a dense black mass of coal before being submerged into a perpetual ice age. Or perhaps the Earth has inherently always been a geological laboratory manipulated by forces for which we do not yet have the vocabulary to name. Everything is sleek, neat, and every puzzle piece is forced to sit in its exact place. But today, I am going to invite you down into the basement of that house, a place that is musty, dark, and contains the garbage items that the builders hastily hid because they ruined the entire blueprint. Let's talk about geology. Sounds sleep-inducing, right? Don't be too quick to dismiss it, because what I am about to tell you is not a story about mindless stones. It is a crime scene. Look at these coal seams. They lie quietly beneath the coldest ice and rock layers on the planet. According to textbooks, the presence of coal here has a very standard explanation. Plate tectonics, continental drift, and so on. But there is a tiny detail, razor sharp like a shard of broken glass, piercing through that smooth theory. Their metamorphic grade. You see, coal doesn't naturally manifest. It takes time, and most importantly, it takes heat. A lot of heat, a colossal amount of heat to bake organic matter into coal with a metamorphic grade as high as this. So, where does the heat come from in a place of ultimate cold? The default answer of academia, surely it's due to volcanic intrusion. Oh, the omnipotent volcanoes. Whenever geologists cannot explain a heat source, they pull out an imaginary volcano as a shield. But my fellow detectives, use your logical thinking. If magma intruded, it would leave traces. It would melt the surroundings, creating localized burn zones. But what we have here is not a clumsy scorch mark. These coal seams extend continuously and smoothly for hundreds of kilometers, extending for hundreds of kilometers. A volcano cannot bake a coal seam hundreds of kilometers long perfectly and uniformly like an industrial baking oven, without leaving any evidence of volcanic rock in the surrounding related strata. Using a hairdryer to bake a strip of dough, stretching from Hanoi to Than Hoa, without scratching a single blade of grass along the way. Good luck with that. So, if not volcanoes, then what? An alternative hypothesis, crazier but physically more plausible. These coal seams are not the same age as the ancient rock layers wrapping tightly around them. They are late arrivals, pumped in or deposited later under a completely different temperature regime through geological processes that academia resolutely refuses to discuss. Do they know this? Oh, of course they do. Don't think that governments are hiding documents in Area 51-style secret bases. Not at all. The massive discrepancy between the coal layer and the surrounding rock layer has been clearly recorded since the 1958 surveys. The USGS, United States Geological Survey, conducted sampling in the 1970s. Those reports still lie there, gathering dust, publicly available, not covered up at all. They just use a trick far more ruthless and effective than censorship: dead silence. They publish the data, and then no one discusses what the data implies. And do you know what those figures imply? It is screaming in our faces that there was a heating process on an industrial scale, occurring within a time frame blacked out from history. A giant furnace operated smoothly, systematically. And think about this destructive prerequisite. If someone or something carried out heating on an industrial scale on this continent, then clearly that land was completely unfrozen when it happened. So, what are we truly looking for traces of beneath that permafrost? A misunderstood natural phenomenon, or the coal slag of an incinerated civilization? Svalbard, a freezing archipelago sitting isolated near the North Pole. What do you think is here besides polar bears and ice? Starting from 1906, humans have excavated this place and brought to the surface a jet-black treasure: high-grade bituminous coal and anthracite. This is not cheap peat, my friends. This is top-shelf coal, a pure fuel that requires an extremely harsh process of compression and heating to form. Of course, academia always has a handbook explanation for everything. They open the book and tell us, it's simple. These coal seams were once part of the ancient supercontinent Laurasia. They were formed during the Carboniferous and Permian periods, when this land was still situated right at the equator, basking in warm sunlight and giant tropical swamps. Sounds very reasonable, right? A perfect geological fairy tale. But this piece of coal hides a colossal secret at the microscopic level. When researchers placed it under a microscope, they didn't just see natural carbon, they found something called microcharcoal. Let me explain in the language of a detective. Microcharcoal is precisely remnants of ash, the leftover carbon from burned plant matter. It is an indictment of the frequency of fires. The more microcharcoal you dig up, it means the larger and more frequent the fires in that area were. And the concentration of microcharcoal in Svalbard coal? It is ridiculously high. Many times higher than what Mother Nature could create on her own through natural wildfires caused by lightning strikes or droughts. Nature is inherently chaotic. A natural wildfire will leave scattered, disordered traces. But what we see in Svalbard is a discipline. These are not randomly erupting fires. This is systematic combustion. Its pattern is chillingly cyclical. The burn layers appear at perfectly regular intervals, separated by layers of compressed plant material that are completely unburned. Burn, rest, compress. Burn, rest, compress. Like a 1,000-layer cake of calculated destruction. My dear friend, when you see cyclical burning on such a massive scale, your logical brain automatically crunches the numbers. This is managed burning. It is exactly how modern humans carry out agricultural clearing or controlled forest burning to reclaim land on an industrial scale. Someone, or something, flipped the ignition switch intentionally. But this is when the true joke of history actually begins. Brace yourself, because these numbers will punch straight through your sanity. The coal seams in Svalbard record this cyclical burning pattern throughout the entire thickness of the strata. That accumulation, according to geologists' own metrics, represents 500,000 years of continuous sedimentation. 500,000 years. Now, look at our records. Homo sapiens, our proud ancestors, have only been wandering around this earth for about 300,000 years, and the use of fire on an industrial scale, altering landscapes. It doesn't even exist in any archaeological record until the Holocene epoch, which is a mere 10,000 years ago. Do you see the paradox? We have coal seams proving that someone systematically burned the biosphere on an industrial scale for 500,000 years. Meanwhile, humanity didn't even exist for most of that time frame, and only learned to play with fire on a large scale a few thousand years ago. Thus, we face two choices, and both shatter our current worldview. Choice 1. Either an invisible hand, some entity, conducted management and burning of the earth before humans even learned to stand upright. Choice 2. Or all that coal is not 500,000 years old, like they say. Its age is an illusion. Whichever the case, there is an obvious truth. The history book you are clutching is incomplete. Pages have been torn out, and worse, those who tore them know very well what we can find at the two poles. When you discover an anomalous trace that threatens to break all the rules you painstakingly built, what do? Ignore it? No. The minds that rule this world don't work that way. They will send their most powerful armies there to see what on earth is lying beneath the ice. And that is exactly what happened during the period from 1946 to 1958, an era when both of Earth's polar regions suddenly became a magnet, attracting the most frantic attention of the superpowers. Look at this timeline. The year 1946. World War II had just ended. The world was exhausted. Europe lay in ruins. Economies were depressed. Yet, the United States decided to launch Operation Highjump. Don't let sugar-coated articles fool you into thinking it was a scientific expedition for penguin watching. Oh no. It was a real naval task force. 4,700 soldiers, 13 ships, including an aircraft carrier, submarines, and strategic bombers, dragging such a massive war fleet to the edge of Antarctica at the end of the world right after a devastating war, just to measure ice thickness? If you believe that, I have a bridge in the desert I'd like to sell you. And it wasn't just the US. In the mid-50s, we had the so-called International Geophysical Year, 1957 to 1958. Sounds grand and like academic cooperation, but beneath that cover were frantic mineral exploration activities by the Soviet Union, along with extensive geological assessments by both the US and the UK. The whole world suddenly caught a case of polar madness. They brought machinery. They drilled into the permafrost. They sampled anomalous coal seams, cyclical micro-charcoal layers, evidence of a heated past. At all costs, they mapped out and inventoried what was buried down there. And then, in a matter of just 3 short years after that crazy race, one of the strangest events in human diplomatic history took place. Both of these vast regions, lands potentially harboring massive reserves of resources, answers to the true origins of civilization, were suddenly locked tight. permanently sealed. They established international agreements, invisible legal barriers more solid than any concrete wall. And guess what? Those agreements remain in force extremely strictly up to this very moment. You are sitting watching my video. You cannot just drive an icebreaker to Antarctica on your own to dig around. You will be stopped. Not a single corporation, not a single nation, is allowed to touch those deep rock layers beneath the ice. Paradoxical, isn't it? Superpowers, who are ready to point nuclear weapons at each other over a mere oil field or a strip of land in the Middle East, suddenly shook hands strangely obediently and unanimously to protect this frozen land, determined not to let anyone lay a finger on it. Just like finding a massive treasure chest in your backyard, and the very next day, you decide to pour tons of concrete to completely cover it up, then put up a sign banning everyone from coming near. They found something that made even the most powerful people in the world agree that it is best to bury it forever. But what was their excuse for doing that? Oh, that was the most excellent farce of the 20th century. When you want to hide a corpse, you don't throw it in the middle of the street. You bury it beneath a beautiful flower garden, and after that, you erect a sign. Please keep off the grass. They tightly locked down the Earth's two poles. And what is the excuse they put forward to convince billions of people to submissively accept this? It's ecological environmental protection. It's preserving the pristine beauty for future generations. Sounds so noble, truly tear-jerking, doesn't it? But let's do a simple timeline math together. Let's strip away that lush green mask and look at the blunt numbers. The Antarctic Treaty, the lockdown sentence of this continent, was signed in 1959. Do you know what the problem here is? In 1959, the so-called environmental protection completely did not exist in the political dictionary of the superpowers. Environmental movements had absolutely zero political power until the 1970s. In 1959, factories were still spewing jet black smoke into the sky, and chemicals were still dumped straight into rivers without anyone batting an eye. The first Earth Day didn't appear until 1970. Greenpeace wasn't born until 1971. In other words, the rationale of environmental protection was applied retroactively. They locked the door first, and then more than a decade later, concocted a romantic enough reason to explain that padlock. It's just like being fined for speeding on a road where the speed limit sign isn't put up until the next day. Completely illogical. So, if it wasn't for the sake of penguins or mindless icebergs, what was the real motivation behind this unprecedented lockdown? The truth is, the frantic surveys from 1946 to 1958 found something that demanded absolute containment. And I'm not talking about an alien-style military threat or hidden nuclear weapons. No. This threat is far more subtle, profound, and devastating. Economic and historical disruption. Recall the context back then. Post-World War II. The New World Order was being molded. Wealth was being divided. The global resource distribution system, from oil and gold to financial power, was being shaped and set in concrete. Whatever lay beneath that permafrost, the traces of an ancient industry, a forgotten infinite source of energy, or colossal reserves of processed minerals, was a bomb thrown straight onto their economic chessboard. It would disrupt every resource allocation system. It complicates all territorial sovereignty claims. Who would own the technology of the ancestors? Who would control the furnace that once baked an entire continent? And worst of all, it directly challenges the discourse, the narratives about the origins of civilization. Since birth, we have been indoctrinated with a perfect linear narrative that humans are the pinnacle of evolution, that we emerged from caves carrying sticks, gathering every single spark of fire, then proudly walked to the United Nations, the World Bank, and international legal frameworks to declare ourselves the wisest rulers. The entire legitimacy of modern empires is built on the myth that we are the first and only ones to achieve this civilization. But the coal seams in Svalbard, the baked strata in Antarctica, the cyclical micro-charcoal, they are echoes of mockery from hundreds of thousands of years ago. They expose that. Perhaps we are not the pinnacle. Perhaps we are just latecomers, building fragile sand castles on the very ashes of a civilization that once burned the entire earth and then destroyed itself. And if history is not a straight upward line, but a cycle of rebirth and destruction, then the institutions ruling us today are nothing grand or eternal. They understand that. They fear that. That's why they chose to shut the coffin lid, pour concrete on top, and call it a nature reserve. Look at it. Antarctica. The pure white cap of the earth. A wild, frozen land, never defiled by human civilization until the modern era. That is the greatest bedtime fairy tale that you, I, and all of humanity have been told since our school days, right? An empty land. A blank sheet of history. But let's try playing a thought game. What if that sheet of paper isn't blank at all? Imagine you are a post-World War II superpower. You have just sent the largest fleets and conducted the most extensive surveys to the end of the world to plant flags and claim your stake. You are starving for resources. You want land. You want to assert hegemony. But when your drill bit pierces through the thick ice, when your radar scans the deepest layers, you don't find a pristine land. You find traces, not some nonsense bacterial fossils. I'm talking about evidence of an industry on a massive scale. And ironically, it lies at a point on the timeline that exposes our civilization as mere latecomers. Do you think politicians care about rewriting history books for academic truth? Oh, my friend, you are too naive. What scares them out of their wits is the legal framework. Every territorial claim of modern nations is based on a core principle: first discovery and settlement on a terra nullius, ownerless land. If Antarctica once had an owner, if it contains the remnants of an industry that does not belong to us, then every certificate of ownership that nations are holding in their hands instantly turns into scrap paper. Who were the parties that previously claimed ownership? We don't know. But if this truth is exposed, geopolitical power will collapse. And don't think this is limited only to the Kingdom of Penguins. Look up north, the Arctic, Siberia, the vast territories of Canada or Scandinavia. If the Arctic also hides similar evidence of a prehistoric industry, what will happen to the resource extraction rights worth trillions of dollars in these regions? The legal framework of land ownership and natural resources will shatter if that northern land was not empty when the current rulers set their first footsteps there. It is all a tightly interwoven web of lies. Pull a single thread in Antarctica, and the entire tapestry of power in the northern hemisphere will unravel. So, what must the elite do when faced with a truth that could smash the world order? Their solution, excellently and sinisterly enough, is very simple. Lockdown. They lock down both ends of the earth with what? With guns and bullets? No, that would be too crude. They use a much sharper weapon. Treaties. Don't you find it ridiculous? In the decade where the US and the USSR were growling, threatening to drop nuclear bombs on each other's heads, they suddenly embraced each other warmly and agreed, oh, Antarctica and the Arctic are the common heritage of mankind. Let's protect the environment and only do science for peace. Sorry, but I have to be blunt. They had just tested thermonuclear weapons that vaporized entire islands in the Pacific, yet now they pretend to love nature in Antarctica. That peace is essentially a lot-splitting agreement to muzzle everyone. Absolute restriction of access, total control of all research activities. They establish a system where whatever is dug up, whatever signal is detected, must pass through approved organizations. It has to filter through a funnel called international consensus before a single word is leaked to the media. That is not nature conservation, my friends. That is the risk management of information leaks. This lockdown has worked flawlessly for over 60 years. But there is a problem that those great minds could not calculate. Ice is melting. And the things buried down there by themselves don't know how to lie. You know what people usually say about the truth? The truth is like light. It cannot be hidden forever. Well, that saying is only true when you live in a romantic movie. In our real world, the truth is not hidden. It is managed. The lockdown system I just told you about in the previous section has operated as smoothly as a perfect time machine for the past 60 years. But the only hitch is, Mother Nature is a woman who doesn't like to clean up. The garbage of history, the evidence of those who came before, still sits right there. What are we talking about? Coal, metallurgical slag, radar signals echoing back from all the way in 1958 carrying grotesque shapes, abnormal chemical data from Lake Vostok, even pieces of wood that are clearly processed. They don't hide them completely. How can they hide them when thousands of scientists are still drilling and excavating every day? Instead, they use a far more sinister technique. They weave them into plausible-sounding explanations. Yes, very plausible. As long as you obediently nod your head and never question the details. As long as you don't bring your brain to work. For example, anthracite coal, the hardest, purest type of coal, requiring a geological process with extremely horrific temperature and pressure to form. Yet, people found it sitting proudly inside rock layers that have not been metamorphosed at all. How absurd is this? It's just like finding a perfectly golden brown baked pastry sitting inside an oven that has never even been plugged in. Who baked that pile of coal? And that's not all. Metallurgical slag, yes, the waste matter generated from high-temperature metal furnaces, lying buried in a permafrost layer dating back 10,000 years. 10,000 years ago. Back then, history books tell us we were wearing loincloths and hunting mammoths, right? Perhaps prehistoric penguins knew how to open steel foundries. And scariest of all are the geometric structures lying silently beneath ice up to 2 miles thick. Nature never draws straight lines and perfect right angles on a scale of kilometers like that. What do you think scientists do when they see these things? Will they organize expeditions? Will they dig to find the truth? No. In this system, questions are permitted, but investigations are never allowed. Make no mistake, my friends. I am not standing here to sell you some cheap alien conspiracy theories. This is a structural reality. It is a carefully designed trend deeply implanted into the very organizations holding the power to grant research permits. What is the purpose of this trend? It is to preserve the frameworks, the legal and historical frameworks that bring power, budgets, and legitimacy to those very organizations. The rules of the game are preset. The framework demands that Antarctica must be a frozen wilderness discovered by modern civilization. Period. No exceptions. Therefore, any evidence that dares to poke at that truth must be reshaped, trimmed down, and re-explained so it fits snugly back into the original mold. Do they lie? Not exactly. Their explanations are usually the most cautious choices. They will blame equipment error, rare natural geological anomalies, falling meteorites, anything, as long as it stays within the boundaries that can be admitted without collapsing the larger power system. But my friend, when you use cautious explanations to cloak evidence that is epoch-shattering in nature, what you create is not science. What you create is a distorted picture, a castrated truth serving the cowardice of those in power. Let's talk about coincidences. Do you believe in coincidences? In the world of the rulers, coincidence is a naive word meant for obedient sheep. Let's turn back the clock to the pivotal decade of modern history, the 1950s. That was the era of the International Geophysical Year, 1957 to 1958. Imagine a colossal scientific effort where great powers temporarily set aside their nuclear weapons hatred to launch the most comprehensive, grandest, and most expensive surveys ever conducted on the surface of this planet. They brought along seismic scanners, radar reflection equipment, ice core drills, and entire divisions of military troops. They went to redraw the map of the world. But the question is, what did they actually find? Textbooks say they found ice, penguins, and weather data. But the real records, the unedited reports, tell a different story. Those surveys stumbled upon a gold mine and a minefield. They found countless natural resources, yes, but more importantly, they stumbled upon anomalies. The remnants of the industry we talked about in the previous section. These anomalies were too big, too distinct. They ripped through every historical and geological model prevailing at the time. And guess what our great governments did in the very next decade? And that's right. Both poles of the Earth were locked tight, completely shut down, the same decade, the same diplomatic cover. Instead of an open global investigation where every scientist could dissect the new discoveries, they chose institutional containment. What does that mean? It means locking the monster of truth in a cage, wrapping it in hundreds of layers of bureaucratic red tape, and putting the key in the pocket of an anonymous elite group. It was a perfect risk control move. But every empire has its end, and every ice wall, no matter how thick, will one day crack and shatter. This lockdown system has slept soundly for 6 decades. Now it is waking up in a panic. Their institutional control is weakening, and their greatest enemy is not investigative journalists, but time and nature themselves. Look up at the Arctic. Climate change is doing what no army could. It is melting the cover. The legendary Northwest Passage shipping routes are opening up. The ice is melting, exposing resources, and along with that, exposing the buried fragments of history. Corporations and nations are rushing into the Arctic like starving beasts. The legal framework freezing the North is under severe challenge. Chang Nhiu Ngoi Jen. Chang Nhiu Kong Nhijuok Jua Vao Jehai Thach. Thiksak Swat Vo Tin Jiao Trung Nhung Bi Mat Hong Nen Thai. Shang Kao Lan Gap Boy. And Antarctica? Their biggest legal nightmare is approaching. The year 2048. That is when the Antarctic Treaty will be brought back to the negotiating table. Do you think nations facing severe resource shortages will continue to play the role of holy environmental conservationists for another 50 years? No. They are sharpening their knives. They are quietly building dozens more research bases just to stake a claim and secure a spot. And when the negotiation process opens, secret files, long-hidden data on resources as well as anomalies will become bloody bargaining chips on the geopolitical chessboard. The censorship machine is breaking into a cold sweat. Everything is gradually slipping from their hands. Silence can no longer be maintained because beneath that ice, truths are yearning to see the light of the sun. They can build walls of ice. They can draft exclusionary treaties using the most beautiful words. But do you know what the fatal weakness of any bureaucratic system is? It's paperwork. Administrative garbage. The greatest enemy of concealment sometimes lies in the archivists themselves. Cracks are beginning to appear. Questions no longer come from politicians or state-salaried scientists. They arise from outsiders, independent researchers, anonymous, stubborn individuals who spend decades burying their noses in archives whose security clearance has just expired. They have time, they have clarity, and most importantly, they are not bound by the tight hoop called government budget. They are sitting back and reading the original uncensored survey reports. They use new algorithms to reanalyze old data on coal and the chemical properties of ice cores. And they are seeing the puzzle pieces that the system deliberately hid under the rug. They realize that mathematics doesn't know how to lie. Geological data doesn't know how to obey treaties. The evidence, yes, that evidence of a prehistoric industrial civilization remains intact, lying in wait in the cold darkness, beneath the pure white coat of the world's two ends. Put away the illusions, my friends. The polar regions are locked down for a reason, and let me say it once again. That reason has never been to protect a few seals or maintain environmental purity. The real reason, the rawest and most ruthless truth, is because both poles hold in their bosoms evidence of a different timeline. a timeline that the post-war world, with the pride of those who have just won and are self-appointing themselves as the pinnacle of evolution, is not ready to acknowledge. They are terrified of having to accept that. We are not the first, and perhaps we too will end up just like those pieces of iron slag buried beneath that permafrost. But that evidence is still there. The truth doesn't evaporate. It is merely under house arrest. If you feel what you have heard today has meaning, if it awakens something in your intuition, don't keep it to yourself. Throw it into the world. Share this information with those who dare to ask thorny questions. Those who are never satisfied with prepackaged answers on television. This controlled type of knowledge does not spread through mainstream channels. It can only survive and diffuse through people like you, those capable of seeing through invisible gaps, recognizing what is being deliberately erased from the panoramic picture. The world is a grand stage, and we are not allowed to be merely passive spectators. Always be curious, always be skeptical, and above all, always stay updated with information so you won't be led by the nose. I am Zorro. Welcome to the real world of dark history. See you again.